Mandla, you may be seated. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Comrade Ngwane. Already you've done a sterling job. I must commend you irrespective of the material condition because you've been tested at the same time. In our MIS program director, we've got PC members. You've already acknowledged them. But hence suffice to say that we've been graced by the presence of NEC members. Nkosi, Msuthu Nguchana, Comrade Umbanjwa Kabethwa was already been here in this platform. We acknowledge your presence, leadership. It's an honor as well that we are able to grace our shows tonight. In our midst already, we've highlighted that we've got the families of our stalwarts, in particular the Mandlanduna, the Lutuli family, the Dube family have graced our shows. A lot of leadership have been highlighted as well. We've got the religious sector, led by the Bishop Dube, the clergy, the fivefold ministers also present in our midst tonight. Thank you so much for gracing our shows, even for giving us that prayer, ushering it to a strategic in our midst. We've got the Alliance leadership. Comrade Kabatela, siyabonga kakhulu, Velase Mniswe Mvula, even for what you have articulated, because it represents the epitome of what would have been done in those years. We are glad that you have to sacrifice your time today with the doctor. We don't take it lightly. Thank you so much, Comrade President, Comrade Mkungo, the President of SANCO as well, for ensuring that you come. There were a lot of options, and we are glad that the Alliance had to talk. Ordinarily, in the lecture, we don't give the process of the remarks or the message of support, but for this one, it was critical. Thank you, the chair of eThekwini, Comrade Kasompis. Thank you, Msuthu, the secretary, and the entire collective. The PC members have been already acknowledged. Tonight, it is critical that when you have the grace, the strict presence of certain comrades must be acknowledged. Comrade Ravi Pillay has already been mentioned. Comrade Derek Knight, the former guerrilla from Konto Wesizwe. Comrade Sani, who's our senior as well tonight, is also present. I think it is always critical that, let us give them a huge round of applause, comrades. The entire lecture that is going to be ushered tonight, comrade, will greet all the comrades, revolutionary greeting, who are always here. We extend our deepest revolutionary greetings to comrades and members of the public who are following this important event in various social media platforms and the mainstream media, comrade. We're here to reflect on life and times of President Tambo, who fought the system, comrade, and I'm sure we all understand, relentlessly so. And amongst us, the current membership in the epoch, he is the giant, the gigantic figure who expressed himself in a galactic proportions. No one could match his stride. So, which is why that we only qualify through political grace, comrade. So I think we must just mention. There is a quote that is popular. I'm just going to start. Entice your palate using it, comrade, tonight. It was delivered in Angola in 1977. Comrades, you might think that it is very difficult to wage a liberation struggle. Wait until you are in power. I might be dead by then. At that stage, you will realize that it is actually more difficult to keep the war, the power to wage a liberation war. People will be expecting a lot of services from you. You'll have to satisfy the various demands of the masses of our people. In the process, be prepared to learn from other people's revolution. Learn from the enemy also. The enemy is not necessarily doing everything wrongly. You may take his right tactics and use them to your advantage. At the same time, avoid repeating enemy's mistake. There are several ways of thinking about the constellation of factors, and I close quote of O.R. Tambo. I'm sure that I wanted to highlight this phase. And in our midst, we've got Professor Bonke Dumisa, who must be acknowledged correctly, who is the academia of note, comrade. He studied both economics and law. He's a legal practitioner. We are so proud that you are here in our midst tonight. In our midst, we've got Professor Musa Xulu, who's amongst our scholars, who has created Indonza Yesizwe. He's also amongst us tonight. I'm sure he also deserves a huge round of applause. In our midst, we've got Dr. Lwazi Lushaba Kachen. We also, thank you so much. He has been playing different roles. He's currently abroad as a scholar as well, who's doing, amongst other things, as you might know. So I thought it is always critical that we must highlight them in that way, because what we are going to also present is imbued from O.R. Tambo epilogy of even tapping from the scholars, the academia. It is not just something that must be tapped almost on a regular basis, because the ANC currently is under the scrutiny of renewal. Preferred by many, both in academic and journalistic writings, for its tendency to license lazy superficial thinking, is the idea of the ANC as being in crisis. Admittedly, this characterization does well to appeal to a media manufactured post-94 South African collective political psyche. I'm just going to be emphatic on the issue of colonial and post-colonial, where we just represent our processes. I'm also going to highlight, amongst other things, the fundamentals that, in spite of African National Congress decline and political setback on the May 29, the idea of liberation has not been defeated. So the path towards the NDR continues, Makaban. We are going to proceed with the journey. It's not going to be easy, but we are going to address even the imbalances. It is widespread appeal, comrades, that we must also highlight that tonight, that what, for instance, are the historical factors, structural conditions, and ideological constraints which together render the complexity that it's a real present and inevitable. And I will want tonight just to present, juxtapose what ought to be done, as Lenin will say, and in the true spirit of O.R. Tambo, what is currently expected of us. Kabatela might have said it lightly, that in fact, if you could just wake up day to day and you want to be like Oliver Reginald Tambo, who will then leave the proper footprint, and the ANC will be better organization. It is widespread appeal, notwithstanding it remains unhelpful to thought, progressive revolutionary thought, that we must highlight, reason being that it elites a priori fundamental questions that ought to be posed and answered first. If it was amorphously termed, the crisis is to be intelligible and thus possible to resolve. Crafting an answer on this question already posed, comrade, which advances progressive democratic politics, demands an analysis which eschews the fatal methodological defect of positing empirical markers of the problem, the current crisis we face. That is of corruption, poor quality of social services, factionalism, as the cause of explanation variables on the same problem. I'm sure we must just highlight those issues, comrade. However, what is indisputable is that since the attainment of independence in 1994, the existential life of the ANC, both as a national liberation movement and a manager of post-colonial South African state, manager in that context that you will understand, comrade, has been defined by an unceasing accumulation and fetishization of negative developments. There is abnegation of the revolutionary ethic and political morality, unfavorable conditions. There is one, increased dominance and embrace of the immiserating neoliberal economic logic. The current scenario of what ought to be done was once again the ANC, after the new dispensation, to take a new shape, both a liberation movement, then a ruling party, and there were already contradictions if you think about that. It is we contend precisely this continued accumulation and worsening negative development and conditions that marks the ANC present objective historical moment. That is why the clarion call by President Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa for the renewal of the organization must be read as a directive. Mlimandlela, or umkhombandlela towards a kind of politics that conscientiously intervenes in the continued progression of the ANC present objective historical moment. An objective historical moment which basically is nothing but a constellation of negative developments. The abiding mission for such politics, of course, cannot be abruptly stopped, the progression of this negation history, but to create a contradiction that will be determined of the trajectory ANC settles for in-forward movement. To be sure, comrade, failure to instigate or provoke a kind of politics within the ANC, politics that have a decisively progressive, popular, democratic content, will not spell an end to history as such, but rather an end of the ANC in history. Put it simply or differently, since there is no end to history, the ANC in other contexts will proceed without, or the history will proceed without the ANC. The ANC, there is no gainsaying that it must change, adapt to current material condition, which is why we talk robustly about the politics of renewal. We are not just going to proceed in a horizon or in a trajectory as if things are normal. If we want to see change, therefore our object in the present piece is to provoke a debate within the movement about the necessity as well as suggest a tentative outline of the nature and direction the politics of renewal ought to take. More categorical, comrades, what the analysis below advocate is a return to politics within the ANC, or the ANC return to politics, progressive, popular, democratic politics rooted amongst the people. Kumele sibonakale emagatsheni ukuthi ikhona behavioral changes. Ikhona into eyenzekile esenza sicabange kangcono. There is something that is tangible amongst us, even in the character portraits that we want to be defined, definite analysis amongst the people. We want to change. What is being argued for here is not an idealistic or utopian proposition, Comrade Mbanjwa, good only as a rhetoric device. Neither is it an empiricist or technocratic policy model or program which tabulated recommendations, but it's a fundamental and iconic things that must be done by the ANC. Instead, it is coming together of thoughts and praxis into a kind of political practice that will have to commence its life within the organization as a tendency, full conscious of other contradictory tendencies with which it will have to initiate antagonistic relations. It's unfortunate that if you don't adapt to this kind of change, you must be left behind. Unfortunately, at some point in time, there are sacrifices that must be taken, which is why the ANC currently will want to dismantle every proportion of us not understanding the realistic values of the ANC. Ethically, we must behave like Tambo. Fundamentally, we must live like Tambo. Even how we do things, we must be seen to be embracing almost every spirit of how O.L. Tambo would have lived today. Karl Marx argued, Comrade Mafiga, in the Communist Manifesto. I'm sure the SACP leadership will be excited that we are citing this quote today. It befits that we must highlight it. The executive of the modern state is nothing but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. Is that a reality? Are we currently managing? Are we in the revolution doing something else? Have we been taken by the bourgeoisie? Are we still representing the epitome of why Comrade Solomon Mahlangu was hanged, of why Comrade Chris Hani was gunned down, was shot, of why O.R. Tambo was exiled, of why Madiba was imprisoned for 27 years? For the ANC to be set apart from the rest, such analytic systems should be used even when they enter the state or deployed in the system of government. For as long as no shift in how we lead the state in terms of transnational agenda, what Marx suggested above, will remain the reality, and ordinary people's life will not change and the renewal project will not fade or will not even take place. The issue of job opportunities in the country, the issue of social construct, we ought to do something differently. We can't wait for the type of a private sector that is not amenable on the change. Things ought to happen. Things ought to be done. Otherwise, we are going to lose the hegemony and we are going to lose power as this gigantic movement of Olija Regional Tambo. We must be brave, comrade, like Mama Charlotte Maxege, comrade Sophia Dubrain, comrade who fought, comrade Victoria Mxenge, comrade, kasisutu bati mohati atwara tsipa kabo halengi. Umuntu wesifazane ndlela strong ngaye ummese ubamba lo bukhali ngakhona. We must also do such things, comrade. We must be giant, making sense of the ANC present objective and historical moment, comrade. The present, past, and the future is now in one concept. I'm sure, comrade, we are in the NEC also took a stride of what comrade Khalima Mhlante Umkhulu said, that we must understand a new understanding of life, that past, present, and future is one. What is happening in the past has influenced the present, and what is going to happen currently must influence and outgrown even our life. It means that the type of a legacy project, this ANC does not belong to us alone, comrade. Our generations, the next generations, the offsprings must also tap into this generation, must also tap in the ANC of Oliver Regional Tambo, comrade. Any endeavor to gain a proper handling of the longer history, comrade, the ANC must equally apprehend the nature of the colonial state, the former state itself in opposition to, which is critical, I've already highlighted, as is now well known, comrade, alla Focati, the nature of power determines the nature of the opposition to it. However, more germane to us is a more fundamental qualitative change that occurs in the nature of the relationship as well as the character of the ANC. In the recent past of the period after independence in 1994, comrade, at surface level, it is obvious that the history of the ANC since independence, owing to its domination of state power, has unfolded, comrade. And we must understand that together with the history of the post-colonial South African state. So it is intertwined that we have to become such that readable in the history and character of the post-colonial South African state is the recent history and character of the ANC and vice versa. I've already simplified this analogy, comrade, that the type of the ANC we will emulate and we have emulated or we have inherited must sustain the longevity, must also contain the hegemony on the ground to untangle this welding together of the two histories, which is the ANC and the post-colonial South African state, and practices bureaucratic management of the state and political practice. The analysis deliberately steps out of the more common, well-rehearsed internalist or inward-looking intellectual rumination of the ANC present. In other words, comrade City, uma sizoqhubeka singene ku-3 spheres of government, sichazele ama-voters, sichazele our constituency, ukuthi ku-difficult kanjani ukudrive i-social transformation. Kuyofanele sazi ukuthi we are not revolutionaries, but we are subscribing to what Karl Marx said, that we are managing the affairs of the bourgeoisie. Are we that, or we are revolutionaries that are going to change the people's lives? The analysis extends the horizon beyond the internal ANC intellectual and policy debates to a much larger field or terrain of thought, comrades. More may be gained. We are convinced currently that in rereading the post-colonial reality of both the ANC and the post-colonial South African state, together with an intra-contradictions to the reality of other African nationalist movements and post-colonial African state. This is amongst other principles of the renewal that we must start and that we must do. To start with the post-colonial state in Africa emerges directly out of antagonistic encounter between the colonial state and anti-colonial movement, an alliance of various democratic movements organized into popular nationalist front Thus, the post-colonial state is what remains at the end of a protracted encounter between these two forces, each soon obliterating the other ideological, organizationally, and institutionally. I'm sure academians are already alluding to this fact that not unless we do things differently, we are going to the state of the lull, and contradictions are going to emerge and will be blamed, because this is the only vehicle that people subscribe to and relied upon it, that we are going to change their lives. And it's a serious contrast that when they see us as leaders, lives changing, but not theirs, they then tend to renegade, then slowly rejecting us. And I've already highlighted, remember that we are facing an ideological superstructure. The media in particular is always perpetuating the ANC that is in crisis, the ANC that is not performing, the ANC that is not doing things in a correct way. Virtually everywhere in the colonial world, this encounter is marked by skewed relations of power in favor of the colonial state, which is nothing but a local expression of the racialized metropolitan bourgeoisie power. I'm avoiding deliberate, comrade, to talk about the contradictions that is currently taking place in the country, because I think we are more sophisticated than the current framework of GNU, than GPU. The strongest ANC will be given power very soon if we're to strictly adhere to all these principles. If we're to change all of our behavioral patterns, people are just going to back us. Backed by military, economic, ideological, epistemological, and political might of the imperious West, the colonial state as a result retains or monopolizes initiatives throughout the encounter. Tellingly, the significance of these unequal power relations is best underlined by the fact that the colonial state monopolizes the power to initiate reform, often with one end goal: to preserve its interest and dominance. The import here is that the post-colonial state in Africa is from ab initio a compromise beyond by the encounter between two opposing forces, unable to decimate each other, unequal powers relations between them. I'm sure we also agree when it comes to this principle, and it is something that we must defeat. So that the point is not lost to us as the ANC comrade, just as this had been the reality of newly independent post-colonial African state in the 1960s. It is similar, was and remains the reality of the post-colonial South Africa state since its inception in the 1994. Nothing in history and thought suggests that South Africa is an exception. And if we really love the legacy of Oliver Reginald Tambo, we ought to do things differently. Neither is there anything revolutionary or novel about the post-94 South African state. It is like other post-colonial African states, both an outcome and embodiment of a compromise, political, ideological, economic, and cultural compromise. One notable difference, comrades, is that during the first wave of the independence in the 1960s and the second wave in the mid-70s to early 80s, perhaps to a lesser extent, international economic order tolerates a semblance of ideological plurality, which is something that is well understood by comrades. Consequently, if the early post-colonial African states are able to, instance, to experiment within a state-led model of a development infused with a strong social democratic content without incurring the wrath of the capitalistic West, by 1994, when South Africa gains independence, that possibility had long been precluded by the triumphant neoliberal order. To put it simply, comrade, ngenkathi sithatha state relative Uyasho President, former President Tambo is saying that he went into the office as the deputy president. There was nothing, not even a clean paper. It means that we had to dismantle the ready-made machinery and start afresh. The last vessel that we have in the country was sold to the Lord of London in 1991. The banking system has been destroyed. We are starting afresh that process, and people who are to combat Oliver Reginald Tambo said, At that particular time, people will be expecting a lot from you, in particular service delivery. You'll be blamed for the sins of the incumbents. You'll be blamed by the apartheid hegemony. You'll be blamed by superstructure, whether legal system, whether media, whether type of education. To attempt a metaphor, comrade, the post-colonial South Africa state is birthed into an asphyxiating economic ideological cul-de-sac. In an essay conceived with the politics of renewal, what lesson does this hold for comrade concerned with the politics of renewal within the ANC? The lesson is to be argued that the true meanings and aspirations that the interrelated concept of liberation and emancipation evokes amongst the people far exceeded what 1994 symbolizes or renders possible, reclaiming the right to reimagine not for but together with the popular masses the meanings of freedom and emancipation away from the domain of thought and political practice carved out to be, we argue, one of the primary tasks in the pursuit of the politics of the renewal. I'm sure, comrade, we have already debunked the myth that the current trajectory and the current scenario is going to allow us to change the scenario or to change the environment. We still have to fight. The revolution in the form of NDR will not be attained by a tamed ANC. A new type of a branch, an activist branch, must do things differently. If we're still going to expect media, opposition people to identify a pothole or to identify tap that is running day and night with the municipal water, and if we don't do such a thing and report it on time, then people are going to lose the credence and the trust in us. They will then look somewhere, they will then look elsewhere. But if we build stronger branches, I know if we really aspire to be like Oliver Reginald Tambo, you could even sacrifice that I'm not going to allow the membership of the ANC branch to be bulk deposit, to be bulk buy, because I want to be elected. If it means that I must not be in the process, so be it. I want to be a selfless member of the ANC as long as the ANC is going to live, as long as the ANC is going to survive, comrades. The outcome of the liberation struggle for this cadre could not be a foregone conclusion. South Africa, which in essence is an institutional expression of the compromise, is heralded by a reformation of the popular nationalist movement and its ideology of progressive popular nationalism into a bureaucratized state-centered movement with a state nationalism and its new ideological compass. I'm going to fast track towards the end, comrades, but these are the juicy details that you just wanted to highlight tonight, so that people could still think, the thought must still permeate that the ANC, in terms of praxis, remain the center that is going to deliver the national democratic revolution. One day we'll have a national democratic society because of the current generation that is going to do things differently, comrades. Only until a disbelieving post-colonial political elite discovers that it is now bereft of a mutual affirming political language which to hold a conversation with the people, has lost the moral, intellectual leadership of society, lacks the political ethic, legitimacy, and revolutionary morality required to hold the post-colonial social contract in place. Fast-tracking, comrade, the process, certainly to speak in the name of the state, authorized by legal national authority, is conflicted with speaking in the name of the people, backed by popular will. Consequently, the post-colonial African state elevates itself into a sole legitimate expression of politics, including the process. Amongst other things, comrade, that would have made things differently if we try already fast forward that let us, of course, we assume or imagine into existence an economic, social, cultural, political, historical, dialectical movement forward devoid of the contradictions or referred as to utopia as comrade usually known. Then there are three issues that one is going to highlight. One, if colonial power's ultimate object in reforming the nationalist movement by rendering its political agenda identical, if not articulable with the agenda of the post-colonial state, is to preserve colonial interest, rooted amongst the people, structured and functioning autonomously of the state in order to create a contradiction necessary for a dialectical movement forward. One comrade is harnessing the spirit which is imbued in us, understanding that we ought to do some things. The ANC must live as a liberation organization. There is still that need, and the ANC currently must lead within this ambiguity of us being in power, but not fully power, because you understand the dynamics, comrade. In conclusion, comrade, exactly 34 years ago, about 2,244 delegates gathered for ANC 48 National Conference, few kilometers away from here. They clapped their hands and saluted the giant of our struggling. In fact, it's hard to imagine that a humble rural boy will rise to such unparalleled greatness, transcending the barriers of race, color, creed, and religion. Oliver Reginald Tambo lived through these principles. The Red Army Revolution of Russia between 1990, lived Second World War, also Cuban Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cultural Revolution of China in 1996. He went on to surrender his very being to the people of this country and pioneered our very own struggle for freedom. I close with this quote, comrade. We did not tear ourselves apart at times for a lack of progress. We're always ready to accept our mistakes and correct them. Above all, we succeeded to foster and defend our unity, even in bleak moments. We're never in doubt that our people's cause shall triumph, close quotes. Comrades and compatriots, our lesson from Tambo's leadership is that through collective wisdom, we can withstand any challenge. Amandla!